You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
This is Voss here from thechrisvossshow.com, thechrisvossshow.com. Welcome to the big show, friends. We certainly appreciate you being part of the Chris Voss Show family, the family that loves you but doesn't judge you. At least not as harshly as your mother-in-law. Anyway, guys, welcome to the big show. We have a returning guest. Chris Whipple will be on the show with us today. We'll be talking about the President Joe Biden, I should say, White House and everything that's going on with it over the last 2 years. He's gotten some unprecedented access to it, so we'll be dealing with that. In the meantime, refer the show to your family, friends, and relatives. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss. Go to youtube.com/Chris Voss, LinkedIn group, LinkedIn newsletter, all that stuff we do over there. We certainly appreciate it. He is the author of the latest and newest, hottest book to hit the shelves this year in 2023. January 17th, 2023, it just barely came out. The Fight of His Life, Inside Joe Biden's White House, by Chris Whipple, is with us today to talk about in-depth all of the cool stuff that went in there. Chris Whipple is an author, documentary filmmaker, and speaker. He has been called an indispensable observer of American power. A former producer for 60 Minutes CBS News, he is the author of the upcoming highly anticipated book that we just mentioned before. He is the author of the critically acclaimed New York Times bestseller, The Gatekeepers, How the White House Chiefs of Staff Define Every Presidency and the Spy Masters he was on our show for, How the CIA Directors Shape History and the Future. Peter Baker, Chief White House Correspondent of the New York Times, calls him a premier journalist and historian of the White House as well as the intelligence community. Welcome to the show, Chris. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I am awesome. That is quite the amazing resume you've got there. Give us your .coms or wherever you want people to find you on those interwebs in the sky.
So chriswhipple.net. That's chriswhipple.net is the place to go if you want to find a link to buy the book. By the way, no longer upcoming, actually out. It's been out since January 17th.
There you go.
At chriswhipple.net, you can find that. You can find reviews. You can find an excerpt, and as well as most of my television appearances. I got to update it, but you'll find a lot of stuff there.
There you go. So, what motivated you to want to write this book?
Well, how could I not want to tell the story of this presidency?
Sure.
When you consider that Joe Biden came into office facing the most daunting array of challenges since FDR's day, with a once-in-a-century pandemic, a crippled economy, the aftermath of a bloody attempted insurrection, rather.
Mm-hmm.
How could anybody with a political or storytelling bone in his body not want to tell that story? Especially if you could get access to his inner circle, which fortunately I was able to do. And I see it as a political thriller in 3 acts. I mean, the first act is this unbelievable transition that came much closer to not happening than anybody realizes, and I have untold stories about that.
Wow.
The second act is the first year of the Biden presidency, which was really dominated by the botched withdrawal from Afghanistan and the slide in Biden's approval rating. And then the third year, when Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine and Biden rose to meet that moment and rallied NATO to face down Putin. Then it was followed by a lot of legislative successes. And then, of course, the midterms when he and the Democrats defied the odds. So, look, I think it's a political thriller with no ending yet.
That's true. That's true. And it sounds like you got enough content to pack into the book. What sort of access did you get to be able to delve into all this?
So I spent 2 years talking to almost every member of Joe Biden's inner circle. it wasn't easy, because this is the most battened down, disciplined, leak-proof White Houses in modern times. I mean,
wow.
The bar was pretty low with Trump's White House. Let's face it, all hell was breaking loose all the time.
Was there anything that didn't leak in that White House?
Yeah, exactly. But this White House is a very different story, which makes it all the more satisfying to have been able to get in there, talk to all these guys and women, and to find out that there was a lot more drama going on behind closed doors than anybody realized. From the transition, which is a wild story, really untold until now, and to the present day.
Do you feel like he was the man for the moment, and maybe voters saw that? They're like, we've really strayed far from, I used to enjoy the days where I didn't have to think about what my president was doing. Like, Obama and other presidents, you weren't really concerned. But like with Trump, you would wake up in the morning, I think most people in the nation would, especially journalists, and go, holy, what new bottom have we hit? What new crisis is this? And it's just, I was joking. I can't remember who I was joking with, a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, won't come to me, but I was joking with her on Facebook. I said, the problem with the Joe Biden administration is, I'm not getting enough authors on the show that write books about all the corruption. There's not any corruption or enough corruption going on with it too. And with Trump, there was plenty of them. We had so many authors on the show writing books. It was wonderful for the show. And I go, we need to have politicians have more corruption just for my show, but that's a joke.
Biden might not have been the man for any other moment.
Yeah.
Let's face it, he ran 2 presidential campaigns and never got close.
Yeah.
In 1988, he was he had to bail out over that. You remember that he was accused of plagiarizing a speech by a British politician, and then he got whooped by Barack Obama, and so his moment arrived, and it arrived in the form of this guy who was trying to overthrow a free and fair election, and who had driven us all completely mad for 4 years. And there was Joe.
Yeah.
So he was the man for that moment.
Hi, folks. Chris Voss here with a little station break. Hope you're enjoying the show so far. We'll resume here in a second. I'd like to invite you to come to my coaching, speaking, and training courses website. You can also see our new podcast over there at chrisvossleadershipinstitute.com. Over there, you can find all the different stuff that we do for speaking engagements if you'd like to hire me, training courses that we offer, and coaching for leadership, management, entrepreneurism, podcasting, corporate stuff. With over 35 years of experience in business and running companies as CEO, I think I can offer a wonderful breadth of information and knowledge to you, or anyone that you want to invite me to for your company. Thanks for tuning in. We certainly appreciate you listening to the show, and be sure to check out chrisvossleadershipinstitute.com. Now back to the show.
It almost kind of seemed like voters and everybody else had been just ground down after 4 years of madness, and we just want to go back to normal. We want the guy who isn't broadcasting his crap all the time, who isn't a drama queen. We just would like a FDR again or something like that. And it seemed like, there was a lot of great people that were on the dais, for running for president, but it just seemed like we really just need like an old school politician again.
Yeah. But, now we're getting a little bit of drama.
Yeah.
In the form of the, classified documents. But remember that, rewind to the withdrawal from Afghanistan, there are a lot of dramatic stories in this book that, you may look at this presidency and think, okay, it's a duck gliding across a pond. Looks pretty smooth on the outside. Underneath, there's furious paddling going on and competition. And that was certainly the case, during the transition. One of the stories I tell is how, we all think we've read that story when we know it, right? The oceans of ink have been spilled about it, And yet, I found this unbelievable story about an obscure Trump staffer in the West Wing who carried out this sub rosa operation under Trump's nose and without his knowledge.
Wow.
He kept the wheels of the transition turning. And he had he was one of the few sane people in the White House at that point. Somebody described it was like the eye of Sauron. As long as you stayed out of the Oval Office and Trump didn't see you doing it, you could get away with it. And he did. I mean, his name was Chris Liddell. Mm-hmm. He's a guy who was born in New Zealand, came over here, became successful in business, wound up in the Trump White House. And he was there making sure that the peaceful transfer of power took place.
Wow.
So, I mean, and there are a lot of great stories like that.
And this is a tease out in the first act part of the book that you talked about?
That's right. Yeah. So I was talking about how it's a 3-act drama. That's the first act.
There you go. I mean, it was kind of extraordinary watching it. You know, I had the same feeling, you know, I've been saying for 4 years he wasn't going to leave the White House, and saw most of the movements as that Trump was making as a way to stay and seize power. And, you know, you saw him resistance to the transition. You saw him, doing everything he could to spread the lie and everything else. And, you know, General Tilley was a General Milley. I mean, said at the inauguration, he said that, you know, we landed the plane. You know, it's a miracle, kind of half a miracle or something. I don't have his exact quote there, right? But, he knew how dangerous it was, and some of the conversation reporting we had that came out from people. So, talk to us about that. This guy is keeping their transition moving because they were kind of stalwarting everything and going, you know, we're not really, you know, unless they accept the transition happening, then they're accepting that the votes were fine, right?
Yeah. Well, remember, so if you think back to this period, this was that time when there was this Star Wars bar cast of characters in the Oval Office advising Trump, you know, from Rudy Giuliani to Sidney Powell, right?
I love that analogy.
And they're telling him that Hugo Chavez engineered this rigged deal to elect Biden. Chavez having been dead for a few years. Anyway, so the people who actually were sane, and there were a few of them, including this guy Chris Liddell, were trying to, you know, figure out how to land this plane, as you put it, as a number of people put it, including Liddell. And it was wild because, in fact, Mark Meadows, who was the chief of staff, Trump's last chief of staff, who I called in the Washington Post at one point, I anointed him the worst chief of staff in history because he was up to his eyeballs in, even before the attempted coup, he was the worst chief, but he clinched the title when he became the co-conspirator with Trump. Anyway, Meadows was not so much a White House chief as he was a kind of glad-handing maitre d'. I mean, he would do anything Trump asked him to do, and he was a yes man to everyone else too.
Wow.
So anyway, he said to his deputy Liddell, "Look, you go ahead and do that. You know, you make sure the transition happens, but just don't tell the boss." You know, and
wow.
So it was just complete madness. It was just a wild thing going on, and Liddell almost quit a number of times when Trump did something outrageous, and his friends, including Josh Bolton, who was a former George W. chief of staff and a guy who just wanted to see the plane land, this group would get on the phone with Liddell and talk him off the ledge and say, "Hey,
Jesus, wow.
no, listen, you can't resign because, you know, democracy has to survive here. You know, we got to have a transition." And Liddell stayed. Anyway, it's a great story.
It's crazy to think that, you know, we saved this democracy, this republic experiment with a handful of people that were kind of at the helm. Two people at Justice that told that attorney that, no, we're not going to send your letter out. No, we're not going to pursue this craziness. People in Georgia, you know, that stood up and said, no, we're not going to accept the intimidation phone calls. The Arizona legislature, who he testified at the commission. It's interesting to me how just a handful of people, it seems, were the bulwark against against losing everything.
Yeah, it's really true. You know, this all comes down to just it all sort of depends on a few people of goodwill. You know,
Yeah.
So it really kind of hangs by a thread. But as I say, that's just Act 1 of this book, and Act 2 and 3 are a hell of a ride too. And we can talk about that.
Let's do that. One thing I wanted to touch on, I don't know what your thoughts are, but I remember watching when Biden started acting presidential and doing presidential stuff and kind of I don't know if he was using the seal, but there was, you know how he started doing that staging out in, I think where he's at in Delaware, where they started having a stage and he started showing meetings and preparation meetings.
Yeah.
And one of the people who do media, journalists like yourself, I remember, I don't know what show it was, but he made the comment, he goes, what he's doing is he's getting the people prepared that if this thing goes sideways, we're going to have almost like a dual presidency vision, but he's getting them to kind of force the transition and saying, you know, here I am, I'm starting to be presidential and we have a tradition. We're, you know, basically laying the foundation for that. Which I thought was really interesting because I'm like, this is really scary because they know that this thing may go sideways, and there's a reason they're doing this whole setup. And he's doing the meetings.
You know, they were preparing for almost anything.
Wow.
I among the people I talked to was Bob Bauer, who was who's now the president's personal lawyer. So he's handling the classified documents mess, but at the time he was the senior counsel on the transition. He had a bunch of lawyers, more than 100 lawyers, working this thing, looking at every eventuality, and they stopped counting at like number 70. And one of the unthinkable eventualities was Trump declaring martial law and sending troops into the streets, and they spent a lot of time thinking about that, trying to plan for that, to deal with that. It didn't happen, but it could have.
Yeah. And then, later we come to find out that, SCOTUS could have been compromised if SCOTUS had been called in to decide the election because of, some of the things that are going on there. Let's tease out the second act. Let's dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, I think, the second act was, again, the first year of the Biden presidency. There are a lot of great stories I tell, including day one when Joe Biden walks into the Oval Office for the first time on that afternoon. And he's got a small group of staffers, Ron Klain, Jen Psaki, a couple of others there with him. Klain's got a stack full of executive orders for him to sign. And one of them says, but Mr. President, first, there's a letter. And Biden goes, oh? And he walks around, he opens the desk drawer, and he pulls out a letter from Donald Trump. And it's 2 full pages in a small handwriting. And he sits there and he reads it while they look at him. Nobody else had read it. They hadn't even touched it. They saw it in the Resolute desk. Biden reads it and he looks up and he says, that was gracious. He said, shockingly gracious. And they said, Psaki says, do you want to put out a statement, sir? And he goes, nah. Goes, this is between him and me.
Yeah.
Now, don't you want to know what's in that letter? I mean, my thought is, so I called up Jared Kushner. I got him on the phone. I said, Jared, tell me about this letter. And he said, look, all I can tell you is he's got a lot of levels. And I heard him chuckle when he said that. And then I said, well, what about it? He said, well, he spent 3 days writing it.
Wow.
Now, one question I have is, did Trump in this letter, if it was so gracious, did he acknowledge that Biden was president? I mean, do you leave a letter for somebody in the Resolute desk who is not president?
That's true.
Who you don't think won the election? I mean, that goes to his mindset. And I would think the January 6th committee and Justice, among others, might want to read that letter.
Yeah. Yeah. It'd be interesting to have a public, and he's never published it, right? He's never let it out.
No. It's Biden has it, and it goes into the archives, and someday we'll read it.
Yeah, the Trump presidency. I remember Rachel Maddow used to keep track. You remember she used to keep that wall? It became a wall of all the people that were being, either kicked out of the Trump presidency or quitting.
Yeah.
And remember how it got so big she had to change the studio. And, it was just every day it was just a clown car of people exiting. And, I think with the Biden presidency, correct me if I'm wrong, we're just barely seeing one of the first major, change-ups. I mean, Jen Psaki left the, White House, to go to MSNBC, but, the chief of staff is, now leaving, just barely.
Yeah. And Ron Klain is a major character in my book. Joe Biden is the principal character, but Klain comes in a close second. Mm-hmm. He's a really fascinating guy. Absolutely whip smart. I talk to him regularly, and so you for the last 2 years, so you can really see this presidency unfolding from the inside. Not from Klain's point of view. The book's my point of view, mm-hmm. and I'm clear-eyed and no holds barred on failures as well as successes. But I had this ringside seat with Ron Klain, and one of the more dramatic moments was late October 2021 when I went to see him at the White House. Biden was in Europe. It was one of the really low points of his presidency. He'd gone. He was trying to pass Build Back Better and bipartisan infrastructure, and there was all this ugly sausage making going on, and nothing was passing. Biden went off to Europe empty-handed. He went to Glasgow to the climate summit without anything to show for, his first 6 months or more. Mm-hmm. I went to see Klain, and I said, look, is this the week that makes or breaks the Biden presidency? Because mm-hmm. Biden had just said that his presidency, the fate of his presidency depended on passing these two bills that had not passed. Mm-hmm. And Klain at that point was bone tired. He was frustrated, and he was thinking about quitting.
Wow.
We all know how that turned out. He decided to stay. He decided to primarily because he wanted to see Biden through the midterms.
There you go.
And that turned out to be a pretty good decision, right?
Definitely. I mean, it's interesting how the whole thing's panned out. I voted for Biden, full disclosure. It kind of looked to me like in the first year or two, I've lost track now, but I was really like, oh my God, inflation is going to kill him. It's going to destroy his presidency. He's in this, worst time coming from the COVID and the, processing of goods at the ports and everything. And here he is, trying to do his best. The Build Back Better fails. Lots of finger pointing within the Democratic Party and the thing of maybe the progressives screwed it up and, we reached too far. And then it all kind of comes together, which is kind of interesting. And then all of a sudden he starts smacking balls out of the park.
Yeah. So, but again, remember during that first year, it was rough because he had the Afghanistan debacle, which triggered a slow decline in his, actually pretty quick decline in his approval rating. Mm-hmm. Then he gets smacked by, Jake Sullivan's favorite expression, the national security advisor, he stole from Mike Tyson, which is everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the mouth. And they got punched right in the mouth by the Delta variant and then inflation and supply chain problems. All of this stuff was going on. And as you point out, they managed to pretty much turn things around. And I personally feel this brings us to Act 3, that the turning point of the Biden presidency was February 24, 2022, when Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine and Biden rose to meet that moment. We had the intelligence that the U.S. had on that invasion was like one of the CIA's finest moments. They've had plenty of low moments, but this was probably the finest moment since the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. They had Putin absolutely dead to rights. They knew exactly what he was going to do. Biden tried to persuade, the NATO leaders, and nobody was buying it. And I have this great story about Kamala Harris meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky on the eve of the invasion at the Munich Security Conference. She privately meets with Zelensky, and she says, not only are the Russians coming for Ukraine, they're coming for you personally and your wife and your family. Hit squads are coming. And Zelensky was still dubious and skeptical that the Russians were going to invade. He leaves. She turns to an aide and says, I wonder if that's the last time I see him alive.
Chilling. That is chilling. Wow. So much to have in this presidency. Let me see if we can squeeze a few more things in. You talk in the book about what he thinks about Kamala Harris and their relationship. Do you want to tease on anything? Are we going to see her as another vice president if he runs again? Or
well, it's yeah. I mean, one of the things my favorite. I don't think this book is necessarily just for political junkies. I think that it's a really human story as well. And my favorite moments in the book are the kind of private, unguarded moments with Biden where you find out what he really thinks of Kamala Harris, his fraught relationship with the Secret Service detail, what he really thinks about the press and about the Ivy Leaguers in his White House who kind of look down on him. And anyway, the Kamala relationship is fascinating and complicated because, as I just suggested, he gave her some very important national security assignments. He really had a good rapport with her early on. They were in meetings together all the time, partly because of COVID, partly because Biden wanted her there. I say COVID because they weren't traveling at that point. Mm-hmm. Anyway, things got more complicated. And maybe I'll leave it there and not do a spoiler.
You got to read the book. You got to order it up. Find out. I'm digging now. I'm going to order the book. No, it's interesting. I've heard some rumblings from that camp. You probably heard more as a journalist than I have, but there was some reporting that she's had staffing problems, issues with her staff, and some conflict there. And so it's kind of been one of those things where you're like, I wonder where this goes. And of course, the Biden presidency, we really need to return to normal. To me, that's what it speaks to in his election, and also in the midterms here, where people are just like, we're enough of the circus crap. We just want stuff to go back to normal. Go run the damn country. Leave us the fuck alone. Let's just watch our TV. It's that network thing. Let me just watch TV with my radial tires and just, stay out of the thing. And we also need a politician who return the order, return some semblance of the message of democracy in order to the world, that the world could go, okay, cool, America's back. That sort of thing. Yeah,
I agree with that, but I also think that Biden was and is trying to do two things that are contradictory. Mm-hmm. On the one hand, he wants to unify the country, and on the other hand, he has to call out MAGA and the lasting power of Trumpism. Mm-hmm. And the one thing that surprised him more than anything else in his presidency was the staying power of MAGA. He thought it would be in the rear view mirror by now.
Wow.
He thought, hey, I won by 7 million votes. It's a mandate for the normalcy you were just talking about. But it wasn't going away. And so for a long time, he just talked about, when he referred to Trump, he would say the former guy. Remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah, the former guy. By the way, I have some great stories about him taking a friend around the White House residence and pointing out some of the stuff that Trump left behind,
nice.
And saying, "Can you believe this blanking? You know what?" Anyway, so Biden, after a while, felt compelled to call out Trumpism. He gave a hell of a speech on the anniversary of January 6th. I don't know if you remember. People remember. Yeah. It's a hell of a speech. Mm-hmm. He said, "I'm going to stand in this breach. This is not going to happen again." And and of course, the key to success in the midterms, when all of those crazy Republicans ran, many of them endorsed by Trump, and the Democrats defied the odds. The key was talking not about inflation that all the pundits said he should be talking about, which is obviously a really serious problem he's got to deal with. But the key to the midterms was to talk about women's reproductive rights, because they were pissed off at the Supreme Court, and about Trumpism. So he did, and he had pretty good results.
Yeah, it was really interesting to me. In fact, I was watching the approaching midterms, and I was thinking, my God, we're going to lose this wholesale. And then the leak happened with SCOTUS about the abortion Roe versus Wade being turned over. And I said to his friends I was talking to at the time, I said, you know what? I almost think like we're just going to get killed in midterms as Democrats if maybe that's what needs to happen. They need to overturn Roe versus Wade, and that'll get everyone fired, because no one wanted to vote. Like, people are just totally like, we just burn out on politics. We don't care anymore. And then it happened. And it's almost like, I don't know, it's almost like one of those fateful stroke of whatever things. You have to wonder what the midterms would have been, and the next 2 years of his presidency would have been without the SCOTUS overturning it.
Yeah, Joe Biden likes to say that he's a great believer in fate. And so maybe this was fate, playing a role. Nobody saw that coming, but it fired up the Democratic base and more. It fired up, independents and women. And then, the clown car of Republican crazies that ran for, the people said, Mike Barnacle said on Morning Joe, normal beat crazy. I
like that analogy.
That's what happened.
Normal beat crazy. Yeah, and I think we all wanted that. I think even many Republicans that crossed over, they're like, we just really would like to get back to normal. So you document all these things in the book. You talk about Afghanistan. You get Afghanistan. That was quite the kerfuffle. That's kind of a misappropriate word to put towards it, but that was quite the crisis to have him endure.
Yeah, it really was, and Biden really felt let down by his briefers and by the intelligence. Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, told me that in no uncertain terms, look, everything we did was based on this flawed intelligence that said the Afghan government would last for 18 months. So I went over and visited Bill Burns, the CIA director. I was lucky enough to have access to him as well. He liked my book, The Spy Masters, about the CIA directors. Sat down with him. This was news to him. He said, no, wait a minute. He said, we were clear-eyed about the fragility of the Afghan government and armed forces, and we said that if you pulled out two legs of the stool, the U.S. military and the American contractors who kept the Afghan armed forces planes in the air and trucks on the road, that the whole thing could collapse really quickly. Yeah. At the end of the day, what happened, and I lay this all out in the book, I call it a whole of government failure, because everybody got almost everything wrong, including the U.S. military just not putting way too much faith in their Afghan counterparts. But I think that what happened really was a result of, they thought they had more time than they did to get everybody out safely. It was based on BS. That was just wrong. And so General Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and Lloyd Austin basically tried to pull it off with a cap of 700 American troops. It wasn't enough, and the result we all saw on our television screens. But there was drama behind closed doors over all of this, as you can imagine. I'm
sure. Do you document anything, or did you get any data on I know the CIA went over there, the director went over there and met with them, I think shortly after or during, which was extraordinary. I'm like, wait, we're meeting with the Taliban?
He was over there. Bill Burns is a great character in the book. This is a guy who, is maybe the most most influential, accomplished diplomat of the late 20th century, 21st century. And he's a guy who does not only runs the CIA, but he's Biden's go-to guy when he's got a really big problem and sends him out to negotiate. So he went to see the Taliban. And I tell a story that never reported before, that there was a big problem, big fight between the CIA and the Department of Defense in the midst of the evacuation. DOD is, the Defense Department is, filling these planes and trying to get people out at this extraordinary pace. And they noticed that every time they filled a plane, there were like 100 more people that shouldn't have been there on the tarmac ready to go. Turns out the CIA, without telling Department of Defense, were bringing people from their secret base and dumping them on the tarmac, and they were climbing into the planes too. Wow. And Lloyd Austin, the defense secretary, was furious, went over to the White House and yelling about this. And anyway, so it's a great behind the scenes CIA Defense Department dust up.
Would you compare it to the Bay of Pigs deception that John F. Kennedy felt because he'd been deceived about everything?
One of the stories I tell is that while this was happening, I was talking to Leon Panetta. I know Leon as a result of my previous books. He was White House Chief of Staff. He was CIA Director. I've got to know him over the years. And I was on the phone with Leon, and he said, look, watching that evacuation, he said, it was just like watching January 6th. What's going on?
Yeah.
And Panetta went on CNN, and he called it Joe Biden's Bay of Pigs.
Wow.
Well, this didn't sit too well with Joe Biden or Ron Klain, the Chief of Staff, Biden's Chief of Staff. So the next time I was with Klain, I asked him about Panetta, and he said, look, Joe Biden didn't spend $2 trillion training these guys to defend their country. Joe Biden wasn't for the war. Leon Panetta was for the war. If this was Joe Biden's Bay of Pigs, it was Leon's army that lost the battle.
Yeah.
So anyway, you get so much of what you hear from the White House scripted. I think in my book you get to know what they're actually thinking. And
I love it. You get the deep inside stuff. Let me ask you this. I get, President Biden gets a lot of crap for being old and sometimes, he's not sharp on his communication. Neither am I. I'm 55. So, he's doing better than I am, and he can fall off a bike, and I can't even ride a bike, I don't think anymore. But, and survive actually. But, and he has the lisp that's a part of his, his whole life. So there's a little bit of that. And he's a careful politician. He's a very seasoned politician. And so some people see when he
Wait a minute. Did you just call Joe Biden careful?
Is he careful? Well, that's true. He's made a lot of gaffes, hasn't he? Yeah.
He's famous for going off.
It seems like he's gotten better in the presidency. Am I wrong?
Yeah, he has.
It seems like he's gotten a little bit better. In the old days, he was like, Mr. Jokester. But it almost, I was watching the other day, and I've got a couple of friends that get in my ear, and they're like, he's an old guy, he's losing it. And I'm like, did you see the guy prior that you voted for? But it almost seems to me like Joe is way more smarter in private than he is when he's doing those things. Yeah, he may have a couple gaffes, and he may say things wrong. And sometimes I almost see like it feels like he's working a little bit hard to get it right and not make gaffes and maybe not just come across as the prior guy. It almost seems like he's crazy like a fox almost. I don't know. What do you think about that idea of mine?
Well, I think one of the really fascinating things I think in the book is this. Ron Klain did a Zoom call with all the former White House chiefs. 19 of them, the living chiefs, former chiefs, got on the phone with Ron before he took office. Excuse me. And they came to give Ron advice. And believe it or not, LBJ's last White House chief was on this call. 82 years old.
Wow.
His name is Jim Jones. I don't know about you. You're too young to remember LBJ, but I was a kid, and I remember thinking that LBJ was about 90 years old. He was 60. He was 60 when he left the White House. Anyway, LBJ's chief says to Klain, "Look, you've got to take care of this guy and make sure he gets some rest." I look at him, and he looks like me. I trip every time I go up the stairs. I'm 82. I recognize this. I can see when he can't find a word and when he's struggling and all that. So make sure he gets his naps and all this stuff. I think Biden. He's an 80-year-old guy. He walks like a zombie, like an 80-year-old guy. Mm-hmm. But by all accounts, he's fine mentally. He's sharp. And he's got plenty of energy. Bruce Reed, his deputy chief of staff, told me a story about how they were in Europe and they'd gone through 4 summits back to back, exhausted. They dragged themselves on Air Force One, slumped into their seats, and tried to go to sleep. Everybody was wiped out except the boss. The boss comes into the senior aide's cabin, and he sits down and he starts telling stories. And 6 hours later, as they land in D.C., he's still telling stories, and they're prying their eyelids open, trying to be polite. But he had plenty. He had energy to spare. So,
yeah, I mean, people give off the presence that when he's not in front of cameras, he's sitting in a back room of the White House and they're feeding him pudding or something. He's drilling down the side of his mouth. I mean, this is some of the Republican stuff that I get from my Republican friends. But I was watching a couple weeks ago, and I'm like, this guy's way smarter behind the scenes. Like, this guy's he's a seasoned politician, and he's sharp as a tack, I'm sure, behind the scenes. And I started going, he really is crazy like a fox. You see times what was the time where he said something really rude, or he swore about, I think it was Trump or something. He called somebody, or it was the reporter from Fox News. And he goes, what a stupid under his breath, and it's on a hot mic. And he knew it. Like, people were like, oh, he's doing dumb gaffes. I'm like, I don't know. I think he knew that dart. I think he threw that dart on purpose.
Yeah, how about his line in Warsaw when he gave that speech about Putin, and he said, for God's sake, this man cannot remain in power, right? Yeah. That was ad-libbed. That was not in the speech.
Yeah.
I was talking to Ron Klain 15 minutes after that speech, and he goes, Chris, the president ad-libbed it.
Yeah.
It was totally... Yeah, but he knew what he was doing. And that line is, the White House ran around with its hair on fire trying to say, well, no, that's not what he meant. That's exactly what he meant.
And he came out and said it, too. No, I meant it.
Yeah. And it's going to go down with, with Ronald Reagan's Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. It was a moment of authenticity by Biden, but he planned it and he delivered it.
I've got a hard out for you here in about 2.5 minutes. Just really quickly, what do you think of the next 2 years are going to be like? Is it going to be a circus show, or is it going to be, I don't know, what's your thoughts?
It's going to be, a really wild ride, I think. I don't think Donald Trump he's weakened, but he's still there. And I think anybody who thinks that he is a fading guy who's going to shuffle off into the twilight is kidding themselves. This is a guy who will do anything if DeSantis tries to go for the nomination, I think Trump will do whatever he has to take him down. Biden and his team are planning to run against Trump. They think democracy is still on the ballot in 2024. Anything could happen to Biden at his age. You've got the documents thing out there. You've got and just a lot of big challenges, including avoiding a recession and keeping NATO unified. It's going to be a wild fourth act, and I'll be out there talking about it and trying to sell a few books.
There you go. And you'll probably have a next book going with the classified documents and all the stuff that's not coming out.
Sure.
So that's going to be interesting how that all comes together. Well, Chris, it's been always wonderful to have you on the show. You bring such wonderful insight into politics and everything you have you access to. Give us your .com so people can find you on the interwebs, please.
So the place to find it is at chriswhipple.net. Again, that's chriswhipple.net. You can find a lot of information about the book, a couple of early reviews that we've had even better reviews since. You can find links and some of my television stuff, and I hope people will check it out.
I hope they will too. I will be checking out because I've been interested in what's gone on with this White House. I've been, because it's been pretty quiet. I mean, they kept the lid on. I'm kind of a little disappointed though because we got a lot more great books and authors that came on the show during Trump's presidency. In fact, it never seemed like it was going to end. All the books that were written about it. Anyway, thank you very much, Chris, for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
There you go. Thanks so much for tuning in. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss. Go to youtube.com/Chris Voss and our big LinkedIn groups. Thanks for tuning in. Be good to each other. Stay safe. And we'll see you guys next time. That should have a